I'm John Hanna with CDTV.net in New York, and we have Tim Yeager, an associate professor of finance at the University of Arkansas and former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Professor, here's a question. What is a bank stress test?
Well, in this case, what the Treasury is trying to do is find out whether banks will still be able to lend money if the dire economic circumstances that we have continue to play out for quite some time. So if unemployment rises above 9%, I think in one scenario, and above 10% in another, will the banks still be solvent technically? And will they be able to make loans to get the economy moving again? That's the idea.
Okay, so what happens if a bank fails the stress test?
Well, that's not clear. Let me just back up for just a minute. I'm not sure that this stress test plan was very well thought out to begin with. And when it was first announced, I was very skeptical. And I'm skeptical for two reasons. First of all, bank examiners are in these banks constantly. Most of these large banks have what we call continuous supervision, so that there are examiners that live in the buildings, in the headquarters buildings of these big banks. And they can ask for and receive all sorts of information anytime they want. And the thought that all of a sudden we're going to be able to devise the right stress test that will pierce the corporate veil, as you will, and see what the underlying risks really truly are, seems like a fantasy to me. You know, we already have a good amount of information, or I should say the regulators have a good amount of information on these banks. And if there would have been a stress test that really shed light on how these banks were going to do, the regulators would have run it in the first place. So I'm not convinced that these stress tests are going to show us much in the first place. And the second issue with these things is what is the point? If the point is that the banks who fail this test are going to get additional capital from the government, then why not just give them the capital when they ask for it, as opposed to making them go through these hoops? One of the fears is that banks will be put into a list of either passed the test or failed the test. And if they fail the test, then there might be at least a mini run on these banks. So I don't really see an advantage of these stress tests to begin with.
Is this kind of like a political move, or why did this come about right now? I mean, why do we have these things now?
Yeah, I think that it was done hastily without a lot of thought, quite frankly. And I think that the Treasury Department had so much on its plate, and they were trying to do what they could very quickly to calm the public and calm the financial sector. And probably at the time it seemed like a good idea to them. So at the time they were thinking, well, there's panic among some investors, there's panic in the financial institutions, and if we can show that these banks can get by even if the economy performs terribly in a deep recession, then that's going to bring some stability to the financial sector. And what we'll do is we'll show even if these banks don't think they can get by with their own capital, then the government will be willing to inject that amount of capital to keep the banks stable. So I think they thought it was going to be a move that would actually bring some bank stability. But I think in sort of a paradox, it's actually become a test that will perhaps further divide the haves from the have-nots. And the banks that are in good shape will be able to declare, we passed the stress test, the government says we don't need any more capital, and then the struggling banks will remain silent. And everyone will know by their silence who they are. And that's going to bring some more instability into our financial sector. So I think all around it was not well thought through.